Live from the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you on the menu. No more arms. Germany puts pressure on Saudi Arabia, but will the rest of Europe follow? Not backing down. Italy refuses to revise its budget, escalating a battle with Brussels. Trashing the treaty, what Donald Trump's threat to tear up a Russian nuclear agreement means for Europe. Messaging disinformation. WhatsApp finds itself at the center of Brazil's bitter election campaign. Plus, brawny, self-assured, and cantankerous Viktor Orban adopts a new pet. All right, it's time to meet our panelists for tonight. I'm joined by Hans Olaf Henkel. He is a German MEP with the European Conservatives and Reformists group. Which of these stories are you watching very closely, Hans?
I like the story with the rhino.
You do?
Yes. And in fact, I have a name for it. If it is female, I would name her Angela Merkle.
All right, there is in fact a competition to name that rhino. All right, tonight I'm also joined by Marietje Schaake. She's a Dutch MEP with the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats. Marietje, which one are you watching closely tonight?
Well, I wish we could all have the feel-good stories of the pets, but I'm not fooled by the sweetness of the populists, because they're all buying pets, it seems, or propagating cute pets.
Yeah.
But the story I'm watching is really the spread of disinformation on WhatsApp. I think it is a very serious problem, and it really damages the right to vote in a way that is well informed. And in Brazil, of course, a lot is at stake.
With all eyes on Brazil,
yes,
especially within the region, what that would mean for the region.
Yes.
Okay, we have all that and more coming up in the program. But first, let's start with our top story. MEPs will debate tomorrow how the EU should respond to the case of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist who walked into a Saudi Arabian consulate, never to be seen again. But Angela Merkel isn't waiting for a debate or a vote. The German Chancellor is speaking up. She's calling for a freeze on German arms sales to Saudi Arabia, and she's encouraging other European leaders to follow. Her comments come as new CCTV footage shows Khashoggi alive just hours before he went missing. That's after an explosive admission from Saudi Arabia after initially saying Khashoggi left the consulate alive. The Saudi foreign minister told Fox News that he was killed during a botched interrogation and that it was, quote, a rogue operation, and that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman had no knowledge of the plan. All right, let's hear what the German Chancellor had to say about the case this weekend.
Also erst einmal verurteilen wir diese Tat in aller Schärfe. Das haben wir gestern auch deutlich gemacht. Zweitens gibt es dringenden weiteren Klärungsbedarf. Also es ist längst nicht das auf dem Tisch und sind längst auch nicht die Verantwortlichen zur Rechenschaft gezogen worden. Drittens stimme ich all denen zu, die sagen, gerade was auch die sowieso schon limitierten, aber was Rüstungsexporte anbelangt, kann das nicht stattfinden in dem Zustand, in dem wir im Augenblick sind. Und viertens werden wir auch international weiter über Reaktionen sprechen.
So we've had a lot of reaction, condemnation, shock, some people saying let's wait for the investigation. But here's Angela Merkel calling for an end to arms sales, well, to halt the arms sales. Do you think this is in fact going to punish or hurt Saudi Arabia at all? I'll put that to you, Hans.
No, I think it's the right reaction in this particular case. I myself have met, for instance, Fidel Castro 4 times. And of course, he is also guilty of many killings in his own country. But in this particular case, I think it is very obvious that we have here a head of state, or a head of government, I should say, acting, being in charge of this killing. Everything points towards it. So you can't really arm this fellow as long as he is in power. So I would suggest that other European governments follow, number one. Number two, they should make it clear that it depends on whether Mr. Salman is really guilty, and if he is, then they will not resume arms delivery until he is gone.
I mean, it's easy to say that, but is it even possible to know that?
Well, if they can't prove it, then they should not send the arms. Very simple.
All right, so do you think this is the right way to go? Would it really hurt? I mean,
I actually think it is long overdue. We have voted for an arms embargo on Saudi Arabia in this House 4 times because of the war in Yemen, which should have been reason enough.
But they could just go get it somewhere else, right?
Yes, they could, but at least we would have the moral high ground, and I think that's very important. And we now see that this regime is lying. and it's unreliable. And those who thought that in Mohammed bin Salman and his government they would have a reliable partner can no longer really keep that up. So I think the lies have now become so serious that the credibility is entirely gone for those who still had it.
Because you're talking about a moral high ground, but let's look at what this actually means for them, you know, in terms of numbers. Because how much does the EU stand to lose if it follows Germany's example, for example? Saudi Arabia is Europe's biggest customer when it comes to weapons sales. Let's take a look. The EU exports about 196 billion euros worth of arms worldwide, including missiles, aircraft, ships and tanks. Saudi Arabia buys 11.4% of them, followed by Egypt at 9.9% and Qatar at 8.5%. I mean, you know, as I was saying earlier, they could probably get arms elsewhere. What impact would this have on Europe? Would other nations follow on the basis of, would this hurt them?
Well, there's one way around it. That is for Saudi Arabia to react, to replace this crown prince or establish beyond doubt that he is not guilty.
Right, it's easy to take a moral high ground, but what about the people who are working in these industries? You know, they would argue, what about my job? Do I care?
Well, I think jobs are really not the main point here. The point is the already very unstable and explosive situation in the Middle East. And if you look at the complete lack of strategic insights that this Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has displayed in the murder of this journalist, Mr. Khashoggi, alone, and then look at the war in Yemen, which is also completely irresponsible. 8 million people on the brink of starvation. That is reason enough for an EU-wide weapons embargo. We've called for it in this House, so I think what the Chancellor is doing is good. It's better now than never.
So you're raising it, the point. There have been a lot of people displaced, killed in the war in Yemen, backed by Saudi Arabia, yet why now? Why just now?
Because I think the credibility or the hope that people had in Mohammed bin Salman as a reformer has completely been burst. This whole bubble of promise and narrative of reform can no longer hold. I mean, the lies that we've heard over the past week since the disappearance of Mr. Khashoggi are so astounding that you really have to ask yourself whether this is a responsible government. And I think the only answer is no. And if you look at the human cost in Yemen and elsewhere, the repression of women's rights activists, homosexuals, journalists like Raif Badawi, who was flogged with lashes that almost killed him, I believe there's a series of reasons why we should not sell arms to Saudi Arabia, and the other countries on the list, UAE and Egypt, are eligible for embargoes as well.
Of course, there are other countries and other leaders. Take Putin, for example. We just had a vote here in this European Parliament to put Saudi Arabia on the agenda for the next couple of days. And even the leftist people supported it. Now, Putin had obviously ordered somebody to be killed in England. And a British national was killed. The left would never vote for the same thing.
And all these governments,
when it gets to Putin.
These governments obviously will deny this.
Take nobody mentioned this afternoon Iran, which is one of the worst governments in the world.
We're not selling arms to them for good reasons as well. But I hope the Conservatives will join.
I did say that we shouldn't sell arms to.
So do sanctions ever work, though? You're talking about things that have happened. Do they ever work? I mean, it's a symbol of your moral high ground, as you say, but does it work?
Well, there's also human rights sanctions, and I think that those are also very appropriate here to target the individuals that are responsible for this brutal murder by visa restrictions, asset freezes, making it harder to go shopping in Paris, send children to good universities in Europe.
Or visit the yachts which they have parked in Nice. I think this is the right reaction. We should really punish the people in the leadership, like, for instance, the Americans punish those in Russia and put some sanctions on them, which hurts them more than anything else.
When Turkey comes out with their investigation tomorrow, will you trust what they say? Would you believe it?
It's difficult to say. It depends on what they come out with. I don't trust Erdogan in this particular case. However, I think he has some motivations to come up with the truth. And I should say, thanks God, he has obviously more facts and perhaps can pull the rug out under the Saudi government lies.
And what about Parliament tomorrow? What kind of consensus? Do you think there will be a consensus tomorrow?
Well, we've called for an independent investigation precisely to be absolutely sure and not to get stuck in the blame game between two countries. So I think an independent investigation, as the UN called for, is very important. And this Parliament, well, I hope that despite previous examples where the EPP and the ECR were reluctant to condemn human rights violations in Saudi Arabia, tomorrow in the debate and Thursday in the vote, we will see a unanimous condemnation of the brutal, gruesome, unacceptable murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
And just very briefly, if you're alienating Saudi Arabia like this, is it putting a strategic partnership in danger where you keep the peace, sort of? You just keep you don't trust Saudi Arabia, but you just keep them there?
Well, that's a very, very complex question. You are right. I mean, very often the politicians are sort of in between. Should they be aggressive against such a government, opening brackets, regime change, closing brackets, and risk wars with a lot of losses to civilians? Or should they hold up their human rights records? The Americans have very often in the past tried to do that and created other side effects like wars, which were even worse. So it's not as simple as it seems to be.
Well, what is crystal clear is that Mohammed bin Salman has alienated Saudi Arabia from the international community and not the other way around.
Right, and as you say, Saudi Arabia will be on the agenda.
We should make sure that those people who are now going to this big conference are being blamed for going there. I think this would be a scandal, for instance, when the Siemens chairman really shows up there.
Okay, we'll be keeping an eye on that story, of course. And another story that we are watching here in Strasbourg is the growing battle, actually, over Italy's budget. That's in a letter addressed to the Commission today. Italy doubled down on its original fiscal plan, refusing demands from Brussels and setting the stage for the Commission to reject the budget tomorrow. Here's Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte.
Sediamoci intorno a un tavolo, lavoriamo, ma consentiteci di spiegare la nostra manovra. Se il giudizio viene anticipato e non tramite le procedure e le regole procedurali, quello è un pregiudizio che è inaccettabile.
All right, they are not budging, actually. They're standing firm. But they've also said, look, we're not going to leave the euro. This is not going to affect the EU's fiscal health. So what's the problem?
No, it does affect the financial health a lot. Let's face it, the target 2 deficit of Italy has now almost reached 500 billion euros at the European Central Bank. And at the end, it is the Germans, the Dutch and the Austrians who might have to carve up that bill. So I think the reaction of the European Commission is right, and they should not budge. On the other hand, they can't do anything. They can't send the troops to Italy and try to change the budget. If they decide on that budget, they will indeed make it.
Sure, but looking at the other side of it, a lot of the social discontent we saw, the anti-austerity protests, and poverty. Some people attribute that to tightening of the budget.
Yes.
I mean, do they not have a point to pursue a different line?
A different line is good because Italy desperately needs government finance reforms and a sustainable approach. And I think ratcheting up the deficits, promising universal basic income, is not a sustainable solution. In fact, it's very risky, and it is a risk that is not contained to Italy. And that is why the European Commission, of course, has to make its voice heard. It's exceptional that it does in the way that it has, but we have to make our voice heard, and indeed risk that the Italian government would take on would spill into the rest of Europe. And that is something very undesirable for everybody. It will pull down everybody.
And what about the mandate that they have to implement? They were voted on the basis of implementing the plans that they set.
Look,
what about that?
What in this discussion is totally forgotten is the reason for it. Italy was a very competitive nation in the 90s. I was then in charge of German industry. And I tell you, the Italian industry, whenever they couldn't reform, you know what they did? They devalued their currency and went back to the market. And the euro has resulted in the following phenomena. From an Italian standpoint, the euro is much too strong. So they can't export anymore. They lost their industry. And for Germany and for the Netherlands, the euro is much too weak. So we are exporting like hell. The real issue is that we have here a currency which is too strong for one country and too weak for another.
But this is the view from Germany, a year from the Netherlands. There is clearly a difference between countries in the south that in the way that they see how to pursue budgets. Isn't this a kind of let's say, rhetoric or plan that gets people like the Italians really upset with the EU?
Well, I don't look at this as a Dutch person. I look at this from the point of view of the European Union as a whole. And it is not difficult to prey on people's fears, to fuel people's fears and to promise them a better future if you don't have to pay the bill for it. But of course, this is what we want to try to convey to the Italians, that you need to have...
I just wonder if your skepticism is more damaging than to the
Well,
Union.
I think we also have to be realistic and warn the Italian people for the consequences of this budget. I mean, there can be short-term and longer-term effects, but to pretend that this is a sustainable future for Italians and that people won't suffer from the backlash to a failing economy and potentially worse is, of course, not genuine. And we have commitments that we all take by becoming members of the EU and members of the Eurozone, and those should be upheld by Italy as well, no matter what government.
I mean, definitely the Italians...
There's only one solution. They must leave the euro. It's very simple.
Well, they said that they wouldn't, and we will be hearing from the Italians definitely on this debate. But for now, let's move on, because it's time for today's Power Play. It features a rather unlikely couple.
Count me out. That was the Scottish First Minister's message when she learned she was set to appear at a conference alongside President Trump's former strategist Steve Bannon. As news of her boycott broke, Nicola Sturgeon took to Twitter to say that she would not be taking part in an event which risks legitimizing or normalizing what she called far-right racist views. The BBC, which is co-hosting the event, hit back, insisting that journalism is about asking tough questions and understanding what is happening in the world and why. The stand taken by the Scottish nationalist leader comes as Steve Bannon is increasing his profile in Europe. Recently snapped alongside Matteo Salvini and Marine Le Pen, Bannon has been making overtures to the continent's populist leaders ahead of next year's European Parliament elections. Love him or loathe him, Steve Bannon is a name you'll probably hear more of as he tries to bring a Trump-style populism to Europe.
Okay, we don't have much time for this conversation, but should he be given a platform or not?
Yes, of course. I mean, I totally disagree with this fellow, and I don't think we need an American to do something here in Europe, but to deprive him of discussing his viewpoints, I think is crazy. Next time, a European can't talk anymore in the United States. So I think freedom of speech here is more important than anything else.
What do you think, Maricha? Is there a benefit, is there a danger of him?
Well, it's of course a big question of how these people are given a platform. I agree with that. Who do they represent? Are they being asked tough questions, or do they just create a podium of spreading lies, fear and division here in Europe?
You don't think there's a danger of what he's actually saying in those when he's given a platform, that this might fuel sentiments that are divisive?
Oh, that is precisely what he will do, and that is entirely predictable. And so it is not about him not speaking, it is just about the First Minister not wishing to participate in the same event. And that is entirely up to her.
Not engaging, isn't that dangerous?
I like her, I should say this, because she is a Remainer. She wants to keep Great Britain in the European Union, but in this particular case, I think she makes a mistake. If there is a stage, she has the right not to go there.
Do you think there was a political motivation behind her action, like she did that for an audience, a specific audience in mind?
Of course.
Okay.
Look, I wouldn't mind talking to this guy and try to demask him and try to demonstrate that he lies. But if nobody does it, I think then he becomes a martyr, and he shouldn't.
But he also does this through interviews. I mean, he was interviewed on Dutch television before. He was simply just screaming and accusing the journalist of being biased. And,
I think that's his style. But I think you will have the chances, as we were saying, he will be around. I think he wants to stick around in Europe.
Maybe Raw Politics could be a podium.
All right, coming up on Raw Politics, easy to spread, impossible to control. The power of WhatsApp when it comes to election misinformation. Plus, a nuclear treaty under threat. Why the US President Donald Trump is threatening to tear up a key weapons agreement with Russia. That's after the break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton is expected to tell the Kremlin the U.S. will pull out of an arms control treaty that ushered in the end of the Cold War. The INF treaty banned ground-launched medium-range missiles and is credited with keeping Europe free from nuclear missiles for decades. U.S. President Trump made the announcement this weekend, stoking fears of a renewed arms race. All right, well, Russia calls the U.S. move blackmail.
So we are going to terminate the agreement and we are going to develop the weapons. If they get smart and if others get smart and they say, let's not develop these horrible nuclear weapons, I would be extremely happy with that. But if Russia's doing it and if China's doing it and we're adhering to the agreement, that's unacceptable.
Strong words there from Donald Trump. And we have Russia calling the move blackmail and, quote, a very dangerous step. And joining me in the studio is our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, and Eva Kaili, who is a member of several delegations, including for relations with NATO, Russia, and the U.S. Now, we also have the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister talking about a retaliation. And Emmanuel Macron, though, telling Trump that it is important to keep this for the security of the European Union. Darren, why?
I think the reason, essentially, everyone in some ways wins from this, potentially, apart from people around the world. But the United States wins from it in the sense that they obviously feel that Russia have broken this treaty, but they now get to construct these intermediate missiles, clearly, because they think that it is a potential threat, and Trump wants to spend more money on the defence industry, and it's another kind of launch of an attack on China. And for the Russians, well, they win because they can blame the United States. It was the United States that pulled us out of this treaty.
So in many regards, arms race again? I mean,
potentially. What is interesting, I think, as you say, has been the reaction. First of all, the Congress of the United States is split on this, not least the Republican Party. Second of all, actually, Europe is divided on this. As you say, Macron not in favour. The Germans have been pretty muted today, actually, in their response. But Britain, yesterday, their defence secretary, which is the largest defence force and the closest ally to America, said they were going to be resolutely behind Donald Trump on this.
But I think what's interesting is why Trump is doing this. Eva, I mean, do you think this is silly of him to do, ridiculous of him to do, or is it brilliant, actually, from another playbook where he pushes it so far and then moves back and does exactly what he wants?
Yes, actually, I don't think I have an answer to that. It could be both at the same time. So I'm not sure if there is a huge strategy, like a plan that they have a long-term strategy there. But at the same time, they are changing how things are. And this means we have to rethink our strategy as Europe. So I used to say that it's a very good opportunity for Europe to decide what our policy is, our common policy, our foreign policy. And this could make us actually not just stronger, but clearer message out to the citizens. So we have to rethink also our stance to these treaties, and we have to have a clear opinion. So I think the discussion is just starting.
Yeah,
now.
But the problem
and
with
I agree with what you said.
Yeah, but I think the problem with that is that when it comes to Russia, actually the response to Russia, it's pretty divided. Is this a good idea? Is it not? France clearly thinks it isn't. I bet you, though, some of the Baltic states, like Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, probably think that what Trump's doing is a good idea.
Because we know that NATO has this massive exercise happening, because this mounting tension, we know, it comes as NATO is gearing up to show off its military might off of Russia's eastern flank, as you were mentioning. Now, NATO's month-long Trident drill kicks off this Thursday. Norway, Iceland and parts of the Atlantic and the Baltic Sea. Over 50,000 military personnel will take part, including land forces, U.S. Marines, the Navy, the Air Force. 250 aircraft will hover overhead as 10,000 land vehicles test their dispatch timing. A total of 30 countries will take part. I mean, this is a massive exercise. Let's just note that this was planned in advance, but the fact that it's happening now in the context of what we were just discussing, what is it?
I think it's important. First
dangerous
of all,
to do that?
I think it's important because, first of all, exercises like that should take place. We are allies in NATO, and we have to see how prepared we are for several threats. And it's taking place in Europe. So,
a
sometimes
military threat, really?
Some things are like being decided in different places of the world, but then Europe is a neighbor there. So we have to make sure that also we understand how we can respond immediately. And we just now are discussing how we can have like protection of common borders. So I think this is a good idea to start actually, as I said before, thinking how we can react and respond together.
I think the overall problem with this, Tessa, is kind of there is, as with so many of Donald Trump's policies, there's just a lack of coherence to all of this. On the one hand, he's talking about being tough with Russia and saying that we're actually going to break this treaty, which some ways would think would boost NATO. Yet at the same time, he spent an awful lot of time undermining NATO. And actually, ultimately, is this policy as much about China than it is about Russia? And so it is this almost incoherency that actually is most troubling for its European allies.
But this is not just Trump, but this is NATO.
Sure. Indeed. And we will be watching that because it is really a massive exercise happening on the border there with Russia. All right, let's move on to another topic. 1 week from today, Brazil will have a new president, and it could be the man known as the Trump of the tropics. Far-right presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro has made international headlines with controversial views. And now there are fresh accusations that he and others spread false information via popular messaging app. Alex Morgan and our team in theCUBE, they've been looking into this story. Alex, what do you have?
Tessa, WhatsApp finds itself at the centre of perhaps the most divisive election in Brazil in decades. This, the popular messaging app owned by Facebook, finding itself surrounded by claims that misinformation is shared with almost impunity on the platform. And in Brazil, this is a hugely popular app. Let me just show you how many users. More than 120 million people in Brazil use WhatsApp. Now, a firm Datafolha, which is a polling institute, says that equates to roughly 2/3 of Brazil's voters. Now, when you think the population overall is roughly 210 million, this is a huge market for Facebook-owned WhatsApp. But then, look at this point at the bottom here. WhatsApp, unlike Facebook and Twitter, is a closed platform. That means messages are sent directly between users in closed private networks. Unlike public posts and tweets, these messages are sent in these groups. And you and I, if we're not in these groups, we can't see them. And it is here, away from the public eye, away from fact checkers and journalists. It is here, directly between people, that misinformation is being shared. So let me just take you through how exactly this could look. This is how they trick you. 2 tweets. One is fake. Both of them claiming to come from Haddad, the left-wing candidate. This one at the top, praising Venezuela's regime. This one at the bottom, his latest tweet. The same username, the same blue verified tick on Twitter. For an ordinary user who's had this sent to them by a friend or someone they know in a small group, it's very difficult, and a lot of time to leave the app, search the internet, and try and verify this. But such is the problem, the scale of the disinformation, that 24 media organizations in Brazil fact-check posts like this. And let me just show you what exactly they're pointing out here. This one at the top was the fake. Did you spot it? Probably not. The giveaway, an @ symbol, missing. Both of these claim to be mobile screenshots. I can tell you the bottom one definitely is. I took it. And when you screenshot on Twitter, the full username, always containing an @ symbol, is displayed. Up here, no @ symbol, but everything else mirroring perfectly a tweet. One visual clue that took us a long time to spot alongside the journalists and fact checkers in Brazil. And it's examples like this which go to show how easy it is for this information to be shared and how hard in these closed networks for ordinary people to spot, Tessa.
All right, thank you for that, Alex, and our team in theCUBE. This is very interesting in discussion because as opposed to Facebook, that is a public social network, and this is private peer-to-peer. I mean, it is dangerous to spread false information, but what are we to do? I mean, what is...
This is also the problem. What can you do, really, in many regards? I mean, how far do you go, potentially, in trying to curb this? Because, in some ways, it is just private messaging between individuals. Now, we know that when WhatsApp have taken some action, for example, in India, pretty immediate action, when actually some people were killed by mobs after false allegations being made that they've been involved in some type of sex crime, and WhatsApp limited the number of people, essentially, that you can send one message to. So that means
there were crimes committed as a result of it.
Is slowed down. When it comes to election politics, it is a lot more difficult. Should it be considered alongside TV advertising or newspaper advertising? I'm not entirely sure it should be, because you then start to blur the lines between what is a private message between potentially just two.
And as you know, this is happening in Brazil. It's a very important election happening in Brazil. Let's go to that. Thousands have rallied against Bolsonaro, we were talking about earlier during this campaign, now in large part because of controversial comments that have provoked outrage. Let's take a listen.
Fica aí, Maria do Rosário, fica. Há poucos dias tu me chamou de estuprador. no Salão Verde, e eu falei que não ia estuprar você porque você não merece. Garantir o legítimo direito à defesa ao cidadão de bem. Eu entendo que se tiver alguém assaltando ali, qualquer um de nós, por lá de cá, civil ou militar, se der 20 tiros em cima daquele cara, é bem dado, ele tem que ser condecorado e não processado.
Se Trump saiu do acordo de Paris, se saiu, é porque não interessava a seu país. Se é para demarcar o AAA e nós perdemos a calha dos Solimões e Amazonas, a calha norte, também sairei se for presidente.
Hoje em dia, a maioria dos homossexuais vota em mim no Brasil. Se alguém, eu ou você, seja quem for, resolver ser gay, vai ser feliz. Ninguém tem nada a ver com isso. Agora, botar isso na escola, eu não admito. Pode me chamar de homofóbico à vontade, que isso eu não admito.
I mean, he made even more controversial comments that we're not airing. Eva, I will ask you. I mean, he almost made it to 50% so that there wouldn't be a runoff. This guy is popular. So is it, he's genuinely voted by people? People genuinely like him?
Well, I think that this is a new reality. We have these controversial personalities that manage to gain a lot of popular votes. That doesn't make sense. So basically, if you speak like that for women, you have women voters. It doesn't make sense. So I think people are frustrated. The new social media platforms, the global platforms, and the fear of something new that's happening, things are changing globally, make people want strong leaders, even if they speak like that. So I think we have to have a totally different response. We have to educate citizens to be able to look for smart answers. They should not be misled by fake news. They should be themselves who try to find if this is fake or not. But it's not easy. It's a new reality, though. Unfortunately, it's not just Brazil.
A new reality, like an era of strongmen. And as you say, it's fueled by frustration. So it's emotional.
Yeah,
of course.
I think it is, but it's also reflecting, as you say, certainly on certain worlds that we now find ourselves in with technology and changing, moving people. I think in Brazil there was also the added level that Haddad's party has been for years now mired in corruption. We've essentially got two former presidents completely complicit in corruption, and so that will add, of course, to his vote. But he's a populist, and clearly the rise of populism is not just confined to Europe.
It's interesting to see the effect of if he does win this on the entire region.
And the problem is fear. It's not just being frustrated. It's like fear. They use fear, and this is what's the scariest thing about populism.
I think there was significant impact potentially for us will be the Paris Accords. Right. Speaking to some Green MEPs here, and experts say that Brazil is the bulwark really to the Paris Accord in South America. If it pulls out, potentially the entire continent could follow.
Indeed, and as Eva was saying, I mean, this is a reaction really to frustration, and then you have an era of strongmen. All right, let's move on now, because MEPs are bracing for a busy week here in Strasbourg. Let's look at what you should look out for.
The single-use plastics debate came to town today, with MEPs debating whether to introduce an outright ban on items such as straws and plastic buds. Expect a decision on that on Wednesday. It's money, money, money on the agenda as lawmakers have their say on the EU's general budget for 2019. Keep an eye out for calls to limit funding to countries such as Poland over its controversial judicial reforms. Remember this? As the dust settles from the Cambridge Analytica scandal, MEPs are this week expected to pressure Facebook to let the EU investigate the social media giant's data protection measures. And on Thursday, MEPs will have the chance to condemn the rise of neo-fascist violence in Europe, and they could call on the bloc's member states to do more to tackle hate crime.
Eva, MEPs will be really busy. Which one are you watching closely?
Well, the first one that you mentioned about the plastics, I think it was about time to do something about it, and I think it's really, really important. We have to take strict measures and very fast. It's a problem that will not stop unless we stop creating more and more of that. And in specific areas, it's really, really destroying the environment, and you cannot clean the oceans, you have to prevent this from happening. And also for Cambridge Analytica that we have this discussion now, I think it's very important, since we mentioned it before. Fake news is a new reality. It can change campaigns, it can create fear and misperceptions. We have to give more options to citizens, and like Euronews is very important because you're like basically a European network that can give people different information than the one they receive from the new media.
From a journalist's point of view,
platform for all views. I think the plastic debate really matters, but the budget is the real one to watch. There is this divide now between how much money Eastern Europe is going to get, particularly post-Brexit, with less money around.
The budget is the whole year.
The whole year.
Keep us the
We've
whole
got to
year.
look forward to that.
Yes, that'll be coming up. All right, after the break on Raw Politics, 95% done. That's UK Prime Minister Theresa May. She's striking an optimistic tone on Brexit. All right, welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, fresh from the EU summit in Brussels, Theresa May, she came back home empty-handed. And that, she took questions from her MPs, and they were not happy at all with what she had to bring. And she said, though, that a deal is close. Now, this comes just days after hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets of pro-EU supporters in London to demand a so-called people's vote on the terms of the Brexit deal. Now, organizers say 700,000 marched through Westminster, which would make it Britain's biggest protest since the campaign against the Iraq War in 2003. I'm joined by our panelists tonight. We have Darren McCaffrey still with us, our political editor at Euronews, and Richard Ashworth. He's a British MEP with the European People's Party. Richard, you were there at the march. What is the goal? I mean, what do people, the 700,000 people on the street, what did they want? Did they really think it would happen?
There were several messages. Primarily, the message was that they want a people's vote. I'm always slightly cautious on that.
Which might be unlikely, is it?
Yes, be careful what you wish for. They want a people's vote, but the main thrust of their message was a deep unhappiness with the way that this is going. A deep unhappiness that the Leave campaign lied to them, it deceived them, it cheated them, and they feel that therefore the referendum was a false premise, and that it is now time, 2 years later, to go back to the people and ask them again. And ask them, not least, because actually Mrs May around the cabinet table is absolutely gridlocked.
I think the problem with this is that, so obviously some people do feel they were lied to during the campaign. I think if the campaign was run again, it's not absolutely certain, in fact, far from it, that we would actually get a different result. I think what Britain does not need now is another divisive referendum campaign, and that's what lots of people would argue. I think where the failure of Brexiteers has been, and why people did take to the streets, is that the winners of this referendum have not built a consensus of trying to take the people who don't want to see this process, but essentially sell them that Brexit will work, that it can be a success, to get people on board. It was divisive in 2016, and it remains as divisive, if not more divisive today. And I think that's been a failure of the government and actually of the victors, essentially, in the referendum battle.
Let's talk about...
Absolutely right, because the nation is totally divided. Families, communities, and this was an expression of, don't forget, 48% of the population who didn't vote for that, but of the people who were saying, look, we were promised a dividend, an added value element. There's nothing.
All right, well, let's look at what's actually on the table. Theresa May said it's 95% close to a deal. Are you looking forward to that?
No,
do you believe that?
Because I think it's a bit of a loose expression, say 95% done. Depends what the 5% is. And if that 5% is as huge as the issue which is remaining, which was one party think they want global Britain, which is actually severed the ties with the single market, the customs union, and can trade around the world. The other side are saying, actually, that's going to be an item of self-harm because it will damage British industry. The government's been warned time and time again by CBI, by Jaguar Land Rover and others that it will cost jobs. So therefore, you can either have a customs union or global Britain, but you can't have both. And that's the point, where the rubbing point is, of course, about the borders, but at the end of the day, do you want global Britain or do you want...
You can't have it, that's true, you can't have it.
I think with when Theresa May said 95% of it's done, what do they always say? Nothing's agreed until everything is agreed, and we're not at that point yet. Clearly, the backstop is the major issue. Now, Theresa May has been in the House of Commons today talking about this issue, making it clear, essentially, until they sort out the idea of the backstop, there will be no withdrawal agreement. Essentially, there will be no deal. Now, she's given the impression the impression, potentially, that there might be wriggle room to change that slightly.
Sure.
But be in no doubt, no MP stood up in the Commons this afternoon and was in support of this extension to the transition period.
We're inching towards the end, but this is not the end. We will be talking about Brexit continuously. All right, it's time for tonight's Raw Moment. It seems that Hungary's Viktor Orban, well, he has a new pet.
Sok nehéz kormányzati munka mellett most végre itt egy könnyed meló. Különleges felkérést kaptam a nyíregyházi állatkerttől, fogadjak örökbe egy rinocéroszt. Ezt meg is tettem, de az örökbefogadás együtt jár a keresztapasággal, most nevet is kell, hogy adjunk neki. Összegyűjtöttem néhány szívemnek kedves lehetőséget. Itt az idő, válasszunk, hétfő reggel 8 óráig várom a szavazatokat. Most nem kell kétharmad.
All right, so the winning name we found out is Trotters. I think was the first Hungarian name there. Viktor Orban is right.
Well, he's got a thick skin, a bit like his now apparent rhino. But what is it about kind of strongmen and having animals? I was in Ukraine a few weeks ago. Yanukovych had a zoo there. What's the chap from Narcos? His name, I can't remember. The Colombian drug dealer, he also had a zoo. Clearly, I don't know, it's about kind of hard men and animals. Clearly,
Richard, do you have a pet?
Why would it appeal to him that a rhino, a thick-skinned, short-sighted, prehistoric unicorn? Now, I can think of quite a few British politicians fill that category, but the headline one, surely, got to be Boris Johnson. Boris for sure.
Oh, I wonder what Boris's pet would be. All right, thank you very much for that, and thank you for everyone for joining us tonight on Raw Politics. Tell us what you're thinking. I'm on Twitter @TessaCecilia and also @Euronews. Use the hashtag Raw Politics. Have a good evening. See you tomorrow.